Tonight, the Supreme Court issues a ruling protecting LGBTQ workers.
Congress passed Title VII. It intended to make sex irrelevant to people's ability to succeed at work.
What that means for Christian businesses.
The law's text does not mean that employers must treat biological men as women.
This is nationwide protests calling for police reform continue.
Stop fighting! Stop fighting!
The latest flashpoint, Atlanta, after a police shooting there is ruled a homicide. And
we don't yet know what our peak is.
The surge in COVID-19 cases across the country. Plus, medical espionage. Hackers trying to steal coronavirus vaccine research. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. A Supreme Court bombshell ruling in favor of LGBTQ rights. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Jenna Browder. The High Court handing down its decision today in a landmark case that says employers may not fire an employee for being gay or transgender. The ruling could have major implications, including for Christian business owners. CBN senior Washington correspondent Paul Strand is following the story. And Paul, this ruling comes as a pretty big surprise to many, given that it's a conservative-leaning Supreme Court and conservative Justice Neil Gorsuch actually wrote the majority opinion.
Indeed, Jenna, it's a 6-3 decision, and Judge Gorsuch was thought to be a constitutional textualist, meaning that he goes exactly by the meaning of the text, the words that were as they were originally written. And what he has basically done here is redefine the very meaning of the word sex. And as you said, that could have broad implications. Here's my story on that.
The court's ruling says you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, which in 1964 meant male or female. But sex now means both your sexual orientation and your gender identity. LGBTQ groups are rejoicing. The group Out and Equal announced the Supreme Court has made its statement. Our bedrock civil rights protections do apply to LGBTQ workers. This is a momentous day for the community. Judicial Crisis Network's Carrie Severino suggested the justices had to really twist the meaning of sex discrimination to include these new categories.
It's very clear that however people might read that today in 2020, that is nowhere near how those words were understood in 1964 and for many decades thereafter.
The case involved homosexuals fired from their jobs and a man who wanted to identify as a woman fired from his job at a funeral home. But the case has broad implications outside the workplace.
Is it going to be discrimination to not use a preferred pronoun? Will employers now be required to cover health care when it comes to different transition-related things? What about religious employers?
Things like bathroom usage. Things like whether women's sports can continue to exist as we know it if they're forced to allow men to participate in those same sports. A lot of religious freedom questions.
Alliance Defending Freedom's Kate Anderson represented a women's shelter in Alaska.
It had to allow a biological man who identified as female into the shelter where he would sleep mere feet from women, many of whom had been abused, trafficked, raped. These are women who, because of their past trauma, really couldn't be around a biological male while they slept.
And so as for people of faith, Family Research Council's Tony Perkins, he described this today as that it poses a grave threat to religious liberty. And he warned in cases like this before, courts have used words as a battering ram against religious organizations. And at the Southern Baptist Convention, Russell Moore has said this is going to have seismic implications for religious liberty.
But Paul, so put this case into context for us, given other past cases involving LGBTQ rights.
Yes. Now, what's funny is just a few years ago, homosexuality was actually illegal in this country. Sodomy was against the law. So first we had the case that changed that and made that legal. And then the big giant one was the Abergefell case, which basically legalized same-sex marriage. And there, Carrie Severino was saying in that interview that I did with her that the court for years and years said, A, this is what is legal, A. And then with the Abergefell case, it basically said, B is now true. It's absolutely true. And nobody can ever disagree with that idea. So it's one of these things that takes what everybody has basically assumed something meant, like sex meant male or female, and completely changes it in a moment. And now society basically has to decide, well, what does that mean in all these areas like work and sports, et cetera, bathrooms, locker rooms, et cetera.
Yeah, that was a great explanation that you had for us. And you got into it a little bit about what this could mean for Christian business owners and people of faith. Paul, talk about that a little bit more, though. What are the implications here for Christians who own businesses? Yeah, well, imagine something like, well, an example might be a school that's well known for its religiosity, a religious school, for instance, and all of a sudden the secretary, who's been a female for all these years, suddenly becomes a man, and the school has been teaching that that's not right in the eyes of God. Well, what's the school supposed to do if it can no longer replace this person? Things like that. And also there's the question now of, will an employer be responsible for the costs, the healthcare cost of something like a sexual reassignment? Somebody wants to go from male to female or female to male. That's something that can cost, I believe, in the area of more than $1 million. So are we going to have to pay for that? Or the employer going to have to pay for that? Where does that money come from? That all of a sudden is very much a possibility now that the employer or we, the taxpayers, are going to have to foot the bill for that. Yeah, it certainly does open a can of worms with questions, that's for sure. Paul, what other big cases are you keeping an eye on right now? Probably the main one we're waiting for now is the Louisiana abortion case that basically said that doctors in an abortion clinic had to have admittance rights at a local hospital. That case was already decided in Texas, a law very much like that, and the Supreme Court went against that law. But in Louisiana now we have a conservative majority on the court, so they may rule differently. Though, as we see with a case like this, the conservative majority certainly didn't seem to have any effect. All right, CBN senior Washington correspondent Paul Strand, thank you very much. Great reporting. You're welcome, Jenna. Meanwhile, more racial unrest tonight with the national spotlight now on Atlanta. The death of a black man there who was shot by police at a fast food restaurant is being ruled a homicide. CBN national security correspondent Eric Phillips takes us through a tumultuous weekend. Eric?
Jenna, indeed. This all started on Friday night when police were called to a Wendy's in southwest Atlanta because 27-year-old Rayshard Brooks had fallen asleep in the drive-thru. Now, we have some video that I want to show you right now. This is actually some body cam video of when the officer approached Brooks's car. Things were pretty calm for several minutes as the officer gave Brooks a breathalyzer, which he did in fact fail. When officers tried to place Brooks under arrest, that's when things took a turn as Brooks resisted arrest, and in the process, he managed to grab one of the officers' taser. Brooks ran away. At that point, it appeared that he pointed the taser back at the officers, and one of them fired the fatal shots, striking Brooks in the back twice. What has followed is days of protesting, and last night, demonstrators torched that Wendy's, leaving it gutted and charred. Of course, this all comes on the heels of the George Floyd police-involved death in Minneapolis and several other incidents similar to it as of late. Brooks leaves behind a family, including 4 children, and his wife spoke out during an emotional press conference.
There's no justice that can ever make me feel happy about what's been done. I can never get my husband back. I can never get my best friend. I can never tell my daughter, oh, he's coming to take you skating or swimming lessons. It's going to be a long time before this family heals.
Well, the officer who fired the fatal shots has been fired. The other officer on scene has been placed on administrative duty. I should say that both the Georgia Bureau of Investigations and the Fulton County District Attorney's Office are both conducting investigations, and charges against those officers are pending at this point. Also want to point out that the chief of the Atlanta Police Department, Erica Shields, has resigned. Jenna.
All right, CBN National Security Correspondent Eric Phillips, thank you very much. To the coronavirus pandemic and concerns tonight about a new surge in cases. The city of Tulsa, Oklahoma's health department director is now warning this week's Trump campaign rally is risky and could cause a spike in infections. Oklahoma Senator James Lankford says he still plans to go and that he's confident it will be safe. The Trump administration is asking attendees to sign a waiver promising not to sue if they do get the virus. About 19,000 are expected to attend. And this all comes as 22 states are seeing an increase in new cases. Arizona and Texas have set new records for hospitalizations. 2 states, Utah and Oregon, are slowing their reopening process. Well, the Food and Drug Administration today withdrew its emergency use authorization for hydroxychloroquine. President Trump touted the drug in the early days of the pandemic and even took it himself last month. CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson joins us with more about what led to the FDA to make this reversal. Lori, it's great to have you. Talk to us about the heart issues that this is potentially causing. We've heard that that's an issue with this drug.
It absolutely is, and that was really what the FDA was leaning upon, these new studies that showed that people who are having some very serious heart issues after taking hydroxychloroquine, sometimes even having fatal heart issues, and usually these were patients who already had some sort of heart distress. But that, combined with the fact that these new studies show that hydroxychloroquine really didn't do much to help people who had COVID-19 get better, is why they decided that really the risks outweighed the benefits, and so that's why they made this decision today. But we haven't seen the last of hydroxychloroquine, Jenna, because studies continue to be conducted, including studies to see whether hydroxychloroquine can actually help people prevent getting COVID-19, which is why the president took it. And we know a lot of doctors and other healthcare workers take it for that reason, because the theory is that hydroxychloroquine can stop the virus from spreading, but if you give it to people after there's already a very heavy load of virus within their bodies, it might not work. So the jury is still out on hydroxychloroquine. We've heard a lot of anecdotal evidence up until now of people who were on their deathbed, they took it, they got better, but that's anecdotal evidence, not scientific evidence. And a lot of healthcare workers say, hey, remember, 99% of people who get COVID-19 get better on their own. Maybe these people would have gotten better on their own.
Yeah. Lori, so we've seen a rise in COVID cases in some parts of the country. Do you think this is a second wave we're seeing?
Health officials say no, Jenna, that it's not a second wave, that it's really a continuation of the first wave for many of these states that are just recently opening. And then we've seen a lot of outdoor activities, from Memorial Day outings to some of these protests. And remember also, there's a huge distinction between the number of cases and the number of hospitalizations. Numbers of cases might mean that that's just a reaction to the number of people who are tested. The hospitalizations are what we want to look at, and we have seen some increases. The good news, Jenna, is that masks work. We already knew this, but new evidence even solidifies this. So people need to wear those masks, particularly in those 22 states where we've seen an increase in cases.
All right. CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson, thank you very much. It's good to see you.
My pleasure.
Well, hackers targeting medical research facilities developing a vaccine for COVID-19. That story coming up on CBN's Faith Nation.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep as the world watches from the outside.
It's a big diplomatic tug of war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
What starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
And welcome back. Well, as the global pandemic continues to alter our world, health officials are facing a new threat: medical espionage. Cyber spies are targeting coronavirus vaccine research. The FBI says nation-state hackers, including those affiliated with the Chinese government, are targeting medical research and other facilities in the U.S. The wave of cyber spying comes as countries around the world race to find a cure for COVID-19 and for effective treatments to fight the virus. And joining us now is Alex Urbelis, a cybersecurity expert and attorney with the Blackstone Law Group, tasked with tracking suspicious activity on the internet. Alex, it is good to have you. Thank you for being with us this Monday.
My pleasure.
So, Alex, you were the first to flag the Reuters news service of an attempted break-in to the World Health Organization earlier this month. Talk about what happened there.
Well, this attempted attack on the World Health Organization originated from a group that we had actually been tracking for quite a while. In fact, this was a group that had targeted the WHO in the past. They had also targeted a number of other IGOs or intergovernmental organizations like the United Nations, the Red Cross, UNICEF, etc. So we were watching and monitoring certain components of their infrastructure, waiting for it to activate. We saw it actually activate in the middle of March, which was right at the height of sort of the global hysteria surrounding COVID-19 and the coronavirus. And once we identified that this was an attack on the WHO, what we had to then do was determine if this was in fact a live attack. Our intelligence platform that we use to track early stage indicators of cyber attacks can oftentimes throw up false positives, perhaps like when you have a stone you throw into a pond, it creates a ripple effect. Cyber attacks can sometimes be like that, so you may have seen something that's in the past. What we validated within 30 seconds was, in fact, that this was a very live attack targeting the World Health Organization. And then later on in the day, we saw the same sophisticated group of actors also targeting the United Nations, a specific component of the United Nations.
Wow. It's incredible work that you did. The intrusion at the WHO actually came on the heels of an FBI bulletin in March warning of nation-state cyber actors and specifically named Chinese targeting as a significant threat to the U.S. coronavirus response. Alex, is China behind this wave of cyber spying?
It's hard to say one way or the other. In the information security world, we talk about that in terms of attribution. Attribution is very, very difficult because many of the sophisticated groups, the sophisticated countries, we all know each other's tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs. So it's very easy for one country to throw up a false flag indicating an origin of another country. So it's not clear. What's very important, though, is that these organizations are able to detect the attacks before they happen, before they hit their networks. And we're in a very unique situation right now because as global research on the coronavirus vaccine progresses, governments and companies are also trying to solve the logistical problems with respect to distribution and process, and aside from efficacy of the vaccine itself. You think about the United States, we're going to need between 300 million and perhaps 600 million dosages just to vaccinate the United States, depending upon whether we need one or two. So this means that when information is scarce in a time like right now, that sophisticated countries are going to be sending out their information collectors, and that there are so many different components of vaccine development about which motivated and sophisticated threat actors would certainly have an interest. China is going to be one of those countries, but there are any number of sophisticated countries, including our allies, that may be interested in some of this intelligence.
Well, Alex, we have to leave it there. It is so good to have you on. We need to have you back on. This is a topic that is not going away. Thank you so much for joining us. Alex Urbelis with the Blackstone Law Group.
Only a pleasure. Thank you.
And when we come back, how polling works and what to look out for in the race for the White House. Next.
On October 1st, 1961, history was made when a tiny station began transmitting the first signals of the Christian Broadcasting Network.
CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
And now, a new era has begun with the all-new CBN News Channel.
Just moments ago, the Iron Dome intercepted an incoming rocket right on the Gaza border.
And ministering in this area, spiritual warfare is definitely involved.
A 24/7 news network, bringing you the news you want from a source you can trust.
In Kenya, 40% of the medical services are actually provided by these Christian hospitals.
Let's talk about the economy.
Believers here are joining together to win people to Jesus Christ.
All your favorite shows now in one place. Go to cbnnewschannel.com to find out how to get the CBN News Channel on your TV all day, every day. CBN News. Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Election 2020, Democratic presidential challenger Joe Biden is up by 14 points in the latest CNN poll. But what constitutes accurate polling? CBN News chief political analyst David Brody explains how polling works and what to be on the lookout for in terms of reliable polling.
You know, polling can be a very tricky business. And as a matter of fact, just recently in the news, this big CNN poll came out showing Joe Biden with a 14-point lead over Donald Trump. And I want to break that down a little bit to give you a sense of how and why it's important to understand polls and how to read polls. So let's get into the numbers. Now, first of all, there are three ways that pollsters go about surveying folks, all right? Number one, you can do all adults. Then they're generally used on how the nation is feeling on overall issues. So these are 18-plus adults, and they don't really use these polls, the pollsters don't, on voting and election polls. But this is how the CNN poll was done. It was done on just adults only. Then the next level up, if you will, are registered voters. Those are typically how polls are done, much better. In other words, voters that are indeed registered to vote. And then likely voters, and those are done much more closer to the election. Those are the most accurate polls. So you've got all adults, not the most accurate. That was the CNN poll. Then registered voters, pretty good. Likely voters, even better. Something to keep in mind when it comes to polling. Here's something else to keep in mind. How they break down party affiliation, Republican, Democrat, Independent. Let me give you an example. As it relates to this CNN poll, first of all, it's important to know how many Democrats, Republicans, and Independents are being surveyed. So, for example, the CNN poll showed 32% of their respondents were Democrat, 25% GOP, and 44% Independent. However, the 2016 election showed that 35% of people voting were Democrat, 31% GOP, and 34% Independent. So as you can see, when you look at the difference, that CNN poll underpolled Republicans by 3%. And of course, that can make a big difference, not to mention the margin of error, and all of a sudden you have a much closer race. No one is saying that Joe Biden hasn't been leading to a degree in many of these polls, but that 14-point margin seemed a bit much, and that is clearly one of the reasons why. A few other things to think about when it comes to polling. You need to check the wording on the polling. So, for example, let's say there is a question about immigration, maybe 4 or 5 questions on immigration, and then all of a sudden they ask, who do you favor in a presidential matchup? Well, pollsters say that that really isn't the best way to do it. You don't ask a bunch of questions on a sensitive topic and then ask about who you support for president, that could skew the polls. So you need to be careful on that. Also, when it comes to education, that also is very important. You know, in 2016, education wasn't weighted too much into the polls, and we know that Donald Trump did very well when it comes to non-educated voters, and so that skewed the polls to a degree too. And finally, one other thing that's very important to point out is that polls are a snapshot. They're a moment in time, so it depends when you take the poll. For example, if it's on an economic recovery and all of a sudden you're taking the poll when the numbers are looking good, great. What if it's after the George Floyd protest and Trump wasn't doing as well then? That clearly makes a difference. So you have to factor all of that in when understanding how polls work. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Watch Studio 5 Wednesday night at 9:30.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
Finally tonight, when Deputy William Kimbrough pulled over a mother for speeding, he saw a 12-day-old baby struggling to breathe. So instead of a ticket, he gave medical aid. And now, 1 year later, that family is returning the kindness and asking Deputy Kimbrough to be the baby's godfather. Take a look.
Yes. I want him to feel like we're family, which we are family. I felt like I had to give him a title or something, let him know, hey, thank you.
And that was Riley, baby Riley's first birthday, which they celebrated on the 1 year anniversary of the day Deputy Kimbrough saved her life. The acts of kindness on both sides of the story, reminders that when we see each other like family, we treat each other like family. And we will leave it on that note for tonight. Have a great Monday evening. We'll see you tomorrow.